It's been 7 years since Sonic Racing transformed, and this week Sumo Digital returns with Team Sonic Racing. Now we've got two big Sonic fans in the room to discuss this. It's myself and John Linneman.
Hey Tom, you've been Super Sonic Racing this week?
I certainly have. Definitely, it's been the highlight of this game, hearing out the soundtrack that courses through this and all the homages you have to the series legacy. Obviously, today we're just going to look at what we've got on our plate with the PlayStation 4 and PS4 Pro versions.
Yeah.
And just to give people the lowdown on what to expect and how it kind of compares to the last game, Transformed, which we're both huge fans of.
That's right. And yeah, so we did not get access to the Xbox version. And I don't know, is there a Switch version as well?
There is a Switch version, yeah.
I'll be curious to see how that runs. But yeah, we don't have either of those yet, so we just have PS4. That's why we're looking at it today. But yeah, I've been playing it on the Pro a lot here, and I'm having a good time. And it plays quite well, but it's different. So
it is.
You mentioned Transformed, and so this is like more, to me, feels like a sequel to the first Sonic and All-Stars racing game that Sumo did back in the day, versus Transformed, which was focused on changing the track on each lap. So you'd have like collapsing bridges and such like that would cause you to launch off into the air and you take to the skies, or like the afterburner level where you're racing on aircraft carriers and then you fly into the sky or hit the water. I found that really awesome, and it also sort of covered everything Sega, where this is very focused on just Sonic instead. But I think it's even a different development team here. Like Sumo is responsible for the development, as I understand it. It's a slightly different team than before, but I think overall they've been very successful at delivering it's an arcade style racing game. You race as Sonic. It is kind of a kart racer. There is definitely similarities to something like Mario Kart 8, but I feel it has its own identity. I think the key here is going to be higher level of performance than the last game, and also obviously improved visuals. So, resolution. Tom, what did you find?
This game, as we've seen in Transform, scales really well across loads of consoles, and with the base PS4 they've gone with a straight native 1920 by 1080, and on the PS4 Pro they've bumped it up to 2688 by 1512, so that's 70% on each axis of a full 4K. Now, there's no sign of dynamic res so far. I tested loads of shots in the build-up to this conversation just to make doubly sure. Can't rule it out 100%.
The dynamic res stuff is always sneaky.
Yeah, it is. But you know what, I did my due diligence and gave it a good shot, and I haven't seen anything either side of 1512p on PS4 Pro. There is a curveball in that if you're playing on a 1080p screen on PS4 Pro, you're getting a native 1080p, so that helps out a bit later on, as we'll see with the performance stuff. But overall, I've got to say they've pretty much translated the same game experience. There's no visual differences whatsoever between them. I've put up a side-by-side here just for posterity, and there's barely anything you can point out besides the resolution.
Exactly, and sometimes that's enough in cases like this. I mean, I didn't find anything like LODs being bothersome. There's not a lot of visible pop-in.
No, true.
The detail level is high. Lighting looks great. I mean, the game is crafted in a beautiful fashion, so it looks excellent on both machines. I don't feel like you really needed anything more than a res boost.
The overall visual quality in the game, it is a bit of a mixed bag, I think. There's some beautiful modelling on the cars and the characters, and some of the recreations of the stages look incredible. In fact, they've remade a small handful of stages from the first game, All-Stars Racing, and one from Transformed, the Ocean View stage, with that giant octopus creature on the water surface there. Definitely overhauled. They're using the same basic engine foundation as the last game, but modified.
And wait, are they really?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
It is the same. It's a modified form of it.
Cool.
You can tell that they've upgraded a lot of the material work in this level in particular, which shows just how far we've come in a generation span. So there's stuff like improved reflective shaders, and the ocean body's much improved. But then there's things like the shadows, which under cars there's lots of gradients and banding, and it just looks very strange. And then there's also like the dithered shadows in the distance as you drive forward, which again is straight out of Transformed and doesn't really fit what I expected of a full-blown next-gen sequel, especially this late in the generation.
Well, to be fair though, I mean, Transformed was a very late-gen game last time, right? And
True.
It barely hit 30 frames per second, if we're honest. where this is instead targeting higher resolutions at 60 frames per second. So right there, it is improved, and I feel like their target is just a lot higher than before, so naturally you can't expect a massive visual jump here. So one thing that's kind of interesting to me is if you look back like the history of like Sonic and racing in vehicles, it kind of goes back like Sonic R on the Saturn, which again, that was developed by Traveller's Tales in the UK, and it's a very technically impressive game for the system. It's doing a lot of very cool fancy tricks. Of course, it wasn't the first Sonic racing game. There's also like Sonic Drift and Drift 2 on the Game Gear, but Sonic R is the one I think most people remember. We've come a long way since then, though. Obviously, that game was more like a platformer-ish style game, but focused on racing, where this is like pure kart racing.
Yeah, and it feels like a good move, a sensible move for Sega to go back to a full, pure car racing experience, just to nail down some of the new mechanics they brought in. The team mechanic especially is the big new thing. They kept the kind of stunts and the combos to kind of liven up when you're in the air. You've got a lot going on in terms of swapping items between characters, the slingshot mechanic as you trail behind them, and
drafting.
Yeah, and it is mechanically a very unique game. With that, I think they've definitely pushed the boat out technically when it comes to how it performs as well, because I think there's 12 players in a race, and they're all teams of 3, or you can go solo in a traditional way, but the main way to play is with a team of 3.
I'm lining up for my food.
So, performance, I think. So this is interesting to me, and maybe this is one of the reasons why the game was delayed initially. I'd played this at a couple different trade shows over the last year.
Right.
And every time it was shown, the frame rate was abysmal. Obviously, things like performance tend to improve as development goes on, but what I've found is what you see at a trade show is usually not that far off, especially within a year span. It's usually not that far off from what the finished product will be. But here, I feel like they've made massive strides since those initial showings, especially in the Pro, because they're kind of hitting 60 frames per second most of the time. Like I said though, on the Pro, there is kind of a caveat there, I think you said.
Yeah, I think so. I played first on the Pro back home, and just judging it by eye, I was thinking, there are some drops here, but it's mostly 60 FPS as you say, V-synced, and it's a breath of fresh air coming from the 20 to 30 FPS back in the day on the last gen machines. But there are drops. I think they've got sort of a double buffer V-sync style drop where you'll get a kind of a noticeable judder as you turn a corner sometimes.
Yep.
There will be moments where you'll sit back and think, oh, there's definitely something hit the machine here, which took me out of the moment a bit. But overall, 60 FPS. But when you go to the base PS4, that's when it really hammers home how much this game can struggle at points. When you're collecting a string of rings on a long stretch, or certain corners of the map. Even on the intro flybys, there'll be moments where it'll clearly drop as it makes a sort of scene cut. And especially with the team ultimate actions, when you kick that into gear, end of the second lap, start of the third, you're going to hit a wave of 40 to 60 FPS performance, which really deters me, if anything, from using the move, because it's coupled with this really aggressive motion blur. The whole thing becomes very, very sludgy and difficult to maneuver, but you need to use that to win. Your whole team gets a speed boost in that moment, and you're kind of flying, and you need it for the points.
That's kind of a rough point then.
Yeah, definitely. There's actually a silver lining if you're a PS4 Pro user.
Yes, that's right. You say you can actually set the system to 1080p.
Yeah.
Whether you're using a 1080p screen or not, and it kind of cleans up any of those little dips we saw, or at least most of them.
I think so. To be honest, the drops we saw aren't too egregious, but if you are concerned about it, I did notice it is running at a native 1080p, so in theory, you're going to get a better showing from playing that way with super sampling disabled, obviously.
One of the coolest things about a kart racing game is always going to be the split-screen multiplayer, and I think that's where Sonic Team Racing starts to exhibit some real issues.
It's one of the most disappointing parts of the package, I've got to say. So I went into the base PS4 version first, and it came out, surprise, surprise, with a 30 FPS cap. Not a problem in itself, that's how Mario Kart 8 Deluxe works as well. But the problem really is that it dips to 20 FPS, and I think it's often enough that everyone I played with in the office was put off by it. Yeah, definitely as far as the base PS4 version is concerned, it is kind of disappointing because it's the version a majority of people will own of the two, I suppose, and that's kind of the turnout. So yeah, not what I expected.
I mean, just a locked 30 FPS is what we would like to see in 4-player mode. Mario Kart definitely gets there. Virtua Racing gets there with its 8-player split screen. But hey, very different targets there in terms of rendering.
Then again, I did try the PS4 Pro version in 4-player split screen as well, and in that case, it did improve quite a bit. There are possibly some hiccups and stutters along the way, but it definitely felt like a much sturdier lock at 30 FPS as you might expect. Though curiously, in that case, I also tried just 2-player split screen, and there it really shows how the frame rate cap dynamic works, because it kind of fluctuated between 30 and 60. Ideally they'd have either picked one or the other, but as it stands it seems to oscillate between the two numbers, which really is jarring after a while.
Overall, though, I mean, I really do like the game. I think it's got a cool sort of single-player progression setup going on that kind of keeps you going. That's actually a big improvement over something like Mario Kart, which it's just racing, which is cool. I mean, that's what you're there for, but there's not a sense of progression or like any sort of thing to play through. It's just like, well, race the tracks and get these trophies, and that's it.
I agree with that. I reckon there's a lot to learn in this game as well mechanically, and it throws a lot at you right from the start in terms of the team mechanics and all the different wisps. There are so many you've got to learn to really get to grips with how to deal with the opponents. It might be half a matter of time just getting used to the rules, and the other half is more technical in nature, as we've covered. It's just sort of, there's some stuff that they need to improve. They've come a long way since the trade show builds we've seen, but that's how the PS4 and PS4 Pro versions stack up on release. So we'll for sure be back with the Xbox One and the Switch version, perhaps most interestingly.
Yes, Switch is actually the one I want to see the most, just because, this seems like a great portable game, but I'm really curious to know if they aim for 30 FPS or if they're still targeting 60 and they turn on the visuals. And what about split screen? I mean, if 4-player split screen is struggling on the PS4 and the single-player game on Switch, let's say they do theoretically target 30 FPS, what does that leave for 4-player? I mean, we don't know. Maybe they are going for 60, but I can't wait to find out.
All that to discover as we go. But in the meantime, thanks so much for joining me, John.
But of course, Tom, have a wonderful day. Thanks for having me. All that good stuff.
Thanks so much. And if you did like this analysis, please feel free to like or subscribe to support what we do at Digital Foundry. And hit that bell to get notifications as any video lands. To get this video at source file quality, we have the source file at digitalfoundry.net. And to get in touch with myself, John, or the rest of the team, just use Twitter. But from the both of us, thanks for watching.